Hello, everybody. This is Deepti this side. On behalf of India March for Science, I welcome you all to the fourth edition of India March for Science. Science and scientific temper are the pillars on which the material development, prosperity, and cultural well being of society rests. India March for Science, as an integral part of the Global March for Science, is an earnest endeavor to celebrate science, to score the importance of cultivating scientific temper, reflecting the aspirations of scientists, teachers, science communicators, and all the science loving people. The COVID 19 situation has brought much of the world to a standstill today. However, we did see certain drops in the carbon emissions by 5%. Of course, to keep up those rates is now up to us. Clearly, human beings are part of nature, and all activity that impacts the environment also impacts us. According to Marshall Burke from the Department of Earth System Science at Stanford University, in China, just 2 months of reduced pollution has saved the lives of 4,000 children under the age of 5 and 73,000 adults over the age of 70. Perhaps this is not a question of whether the virus is good or bad for the climate, but instead create a functional economic system that supports people without threatening the life on Earth. Having said this, today we have a panel to discuss on this very topic of impacts of climate change in everyday life. We have with us two eminent people here, Dr. T.V. Ramachandra and Mr. S. Vishwanath. To introduce you to Dr. T.V. Ramachandra, he obtained his PhD in Ecology and Energy from the Indian Institute of Science. At present, he is the coordinator of Energy and Wetlands Research Group, convener of Environmental Information System at Center for Ecological Sciences. During the past 20 plus years, he has established an active school of research in the area of energy and environment. He was a member of Karnataka State Level Environment Expert Appraisal Committee from 2007 to 2010, appointed by the Ministry of Environment and Forests, Government of India, and a member of Western Ghats Task Force appointed by the Government of Karnataka. He is the recipient of Energy Legend 2011, Energy Engineer International 2009 of Association of Energy Engineers USA, Johnny Biosphere Award for Ecology and Environment in 2004, and Satish Dhawan Young Scientist Award 2007 of Karnataka State Government. His research interests are quite wide, of course, in the area of energy systems, renewable energy, energy conservation, energy planning, aquatic ecosystems, biodiversity, EIA, of course, valuation of ecosystems, carbon footprint, environmental engineering education, research, and curriculum development at tertiary level, and many more to come. You can read about him on the network. He's traveled widely across the country for various field research and also for delivering lectures at schools and colleges. I welcome you, Dr. T.V. Ramachandra. I now take the honor to introduce Mr. Vishwanath. Mr. S. Vishwanath is a civil engineer and an urban planner. He has over 33 years of experience in water, wastewater, and sanitation sector, helping redesign rainwater harvesting, aquifer recharge, wastewater recycling, and eco-sand systems. He is an adjunct professor and teaches a course on the theme water at the Azim Premji University, Bengaluru. He's a trustee with the Biome Environmental Trust. One of the current projects is to help the traditional well digging community build million recharge wells for Bengaluru. He writes a weekly column called Waterwise for the last 12 years for The Hindu. He's been active part of the expert committee which helped formulate the rainwater harvesting policy and law for Bengaluru, the wastewater policy for Karnataka that's being drafted by the Karnataka Knowledge Commission. I welcome you, Vishwanath sir. Hearty welcome to you. All right. So in today's panel discussion, we'll have Dr. T.V. Ramachandra present first for 20 minutes, and then over to S. Vishwanath sir, and then we'll have Q&A from the audience. So I request all the audience to put their comments in the comment box. So over to you, Dr. T.V. Ramachandra.
Okay. Now I'll share the screen. Okay.
Sure, sir. Yeah.
It's open. Same problem. Okay, I cancel here. It's there. Okay. UPI.
Yeah, we're able to see it, sir.
Okay, you could see now. Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Deepthi, for inviting me for this interesting session. So today I'll be talking on what are the impacts of changes in climate. I think already we are experiencing that. So the last 1 week, almost all the newspapers are carrying this electronic media as well as the print media is carrying this kind of photograph. This is the cost we are paying for the mismanaging the nature, and also the changes in climate is because of our human actions. Okay. Now with this background, let us try to look at what has happened during the past 1 decade. We have noticed that the rainy days have decreased in the southern India, especially the Western Ghats. That's why we have the frequent floods followed by a drought. The number of rainy days used to be around 35 to 45 days. Today, the same quantum of rain comes in 4 or 5 days. That's where we have the flooding situation. And also, since the landscape is altered so much, the water is not getting percolated. In the process, all the water goes as a overland flow, leading to flooding. So now with the floods, there are loss of life and property. Now we are witnessing that in Kodagu as well as Chikmagalur in our state. And similarly, Wayanad and Idukki are in a very bad state in Kerala. Now, 2016 was said that is the warmest year. The GHG emission went up by 5%. With the COVID, we might have brought down the emission this one, but once our activity starts, we will be back to the same action. But even today, one of the activities that is still going on, though the industries are closed, but still the one of the activity that's going on is the deforestation. That's a very unfortunate thing. And even the environmental legislations are they amended to allow the deforestation process to continue. Instead of making the forest to be conserved, now the EAA allows that. That's one of the sad things that has happened in the recent time. And of course, that is a draft notification. We need to comment on that. Some of us have done that already. I hope the others also will do that and register the disease, register the protest so that the anomalies in the EAA could be minimized. And if you look at the state is also facing drought situation, at the same time floods. Floods and droughts indicates mainly the mismanagement, and also it says there are changes in climate is happening. Okay. Now, when you look at the climate, it shows the increasing trend. This has been analyzed by the four agencies. All the trend give the similar some features. And also, if you look at the CO2, the carbon footprint is also shows the increasing thing. Of course, all of you remember that the Paris Agreement, wherein the Prime Minister of our country assured the world that he will take up the decarbonization. And of course, we have done some improvement as far as the renewable energy sector is concerned. There's a large scale push towards the solar energy, and that's where we are trying to bring down the CO2 footprint in the energy sector. Energy sector is one of the major sector contributing to the CO2 footprint. Now, this gives a correlation between the CO2 and temperature. I'll not get into the details of this. Now, when we see that the greenhouse gases are increasing in the atmosphere, which is the root cause for the global warming, and it is increasing, is mainly because of the human activity. As I said earlier, the major one of the reason is the deforestation. This is a quite common scene when we go for field work in Western Ghats. The Western Ghats are supposed to be a protected area, but we see this kind of large-scale removal of vegetation in the region. Now, let us try to understand how the Western Ghats, the landscape is altered. We have published this in one of the global journals on the carbon scenario. If you see, the Western Ghats, it is from Kerala to Gujarat, and it's about the length is about 1,600 kilometers. And in this, if you look at it is a habitat for the large number of species. You know, the diversity of animal and plant. When we have diversity, we will have diverse food and the medicine. And also the Western Ghats, there are hundreds of the rivers which are perennial. You know, the streams and rivers which are perennial. That's how it provides the water security to the peninsular India. And because of the water security, we have food security. But by removing the vegetation or by removing the native vegetation, we see there are the changes in the hydrological regime in this region. The perennial streams have become seasonal streams. With the changes in climate, we are going to face a severe water scarcity throughout the country and also in the many parts of the globe. And that's one of the things we need to keep in mind. Okay. Now, when you look at the number of species in Western Ghats, you will see that number of species are higher in the region of 8 degree to 14 degree that corresponds to Kerala and Karnataka part of Western Ghats. You know, this is the region which has to be protected, conserved, so that our children will have diverse food and medicine and also the water. And we need to understand that. But unfortunately, this landscape is being converted into rubber plantation or in the name of development or the other anthropogenic activities. Okay, when you look at the kind of the land use or a land cover change, you will see there is a degradation of the forest cover and also forests are getting fragmented. This article is available online. Those who are interested can have a look at it. There has been a last 1.5 decades, there has been a 5% reduction in the evergreen forest cover. You know, these are the native species of the landscape and we are losing them. Now, we also have predicted what is likely to happen in the region. Our prediction shows that there could be only 10% of the area under the evergreen forest in the region. We need to understand that when there are forests, they also sequester the carbon. They moderate the climate. So if we remove the forest, then we lose those abilities. And in the process, we will also start emitting. Instead of sequestering the carbon, that region start emitting the carbon. Now, when you look at we have done the quantification of biomass in the and also the carbon in the terrestrial ecosystem and also in the soil. And we have done the quantification of the total carbon and the below ground biomass also we have quantified. This is based on our field experiment and also the historical data what we have done because of the 25 years research in this area in the entire Western Ghats. Okay. Now we have also simulated what is the likely scenario for the 2030 with the current changes of deforestation or degradation of the landscape. Now, our study shows that there will be changes in the temperature in the region. There is likely increase in the temperature in the region. And also there is a changes in the rainfall pattern and also the number of rainy days. In some pockets, you are going to get higher rainfall. In some pockets, there won't be rain. And number of rainy days will come down, especially in Kerala and Karnataka part of Western Ghats. And that's what we have noticed in the 2018 in Kerala and Kodagu. And this year also, now we are also undergoing the same reason what we predicted about 3 years back. Now, to summarize what I said so far, we have quantified the carbon emission as well as carbon sink in the Western Ghats. And our study shows there is a decline in evergreen forest by 5% during 85 to 2018. And the forest ecosystem Western Ghats holds about 1.23 million gigagram in vegetation and soil. You know, it has stored that much carbon. When we do the deforestation and burn, then all this carbon gets added to the environment. When the forests are there, they go on removing the carbon from the atmosphere during the photosynthesis. And our prediction shows an increase in the mean temperature by 0.5 degrees Celsius and decline of rainy days with a decline of forest. That is where if a Prime Minister of the country assures the globe that he will do the decarbonization, then he should also undertake the conservation of the forest, especially in the ecologically sensitive region. The annual incremental carbon is about 37 million ton or 37,507 gigagram, which is almost equivalent to a 2 cities emission. You know, the Bangalore emits about 22,000 gigagrams of carbon, and similarly, the Mangalore gives another the 18,000. So if I put Bangalore and Bangalore together, the Western Ghats sequester that carbon, and that's how it maintained the balance in the region. And also, if you look at the amount of the in economic terms, this works out to be about 100 billion rupees. That is the worth of the carbon that is stored in the Western Ghats forest. This is what we need to tell the globe. When the globe is talking about the decarbonization, etc., we need to tell them that we have the forest in Western Ghats, which has already stored the carbon, which is worth 100 billion. That's how it is helping in moderating the climate of the globe. That is where our the people who are involved in the discussion in the international forum has to take note of this and move forward. Okay. Now, when you look at the emissions from the sector, you will see that industry sector, the power energy is one of the major sector, followed by the deforestation is the other issue. Now, if I look at the theme of the climate, the today's talk, what are the effects of the climate change? How it will affect? One is there is going to be a sea level rise. Already we have noticed the increase in the sea level in Karnataka part of Karnataka part of the west coast. With that, there is likely the loss of life and property in the densely populated coastal region. The Mumbai is also facing the crisis. In Ullal, people have constructed a wall to protect the people from the sea, but all those walls have got washed away. Crores of rupees has been spent on the walls in the name of protection, but all those things are washed away. Those who have watched the electronic media yesterday night would have noticed the way those stones have got removed in this rain. Then the glacier melting, we all saw that how the Uttarakhand is facing the problem of the flood and the landslide, which is a clear indication glacier melting is already started happening in the system. With the melting of glacier, we'll have sea level rise. The sea level rise will make many people to lose their property as well as their life. That is where we need to understand. If we do not respect Mother Nature, many people are going to pay the heavy price. People who are in Bangalore and Mangalore and Mumbai, we are the ones responsible for degradation of Western Ghats. If we want water, we want Western Ghats River to give the water to us. We do not think about what Vishwanath talks about rainwater harvesting. See, these are the things we need to understand and make sure the local level decentralized harvesting of rainwater is the best solution than diverting rivers and degrading the ecosystems in the Western Ghats. Then, of course, high intensity rainfall with landslides and mudslides is going to be a quite regular now. 2018 it happened. Last year also we had some places, and this year again it's happening, and many people are getting trapped or getting killed in the system. Okay. Then drought. At one end we talk about the floods, other end we have the drought. So that will hurt our agrarian economy. 70% of our population are in rural area. When we have drought or a flood, they are the one going to pay the price, which also threatens the food security of our country. Okay. Then there would be a decline in crop productivity because of increase in temperature. We will lose the pollinators, and also we may have to go in for more and more fertilizers and synthetic, which will lead to the contamination. That's where the people are going to have the contaminated food, and also maybe the food availability itself become a risky affair. Okay. And another thing is a rise in temperature. Those who are Bangalorean knows that in 1800, the temperature of the city was in the May month was 14 to 16 degrees Celsius. Today we have gone to 37 to 38 degrees Celsius in the May month. And also Bangalore had the distinction of having a temperature of 0 degrees Celsius during December. Now, and we were growing apples in the palace orchard. Today we have lost all those luxuries, and it has been replaced by the garbage everywhere. Okay. Now the carbon dioxide, of course, is acidifying the seawater. That's what the study also shows. To understand further, we have done the emissions across the major cities in India to understand which are the sectors are contributing to the. So this is the work done by our group in the last 5 years, and we found that one of the major thing is that in India everyone is expert. Everyone talks about urbanization but doesn't do the planning. That is the good example is a Bangalore, and loss of carbon sink with the unplanned urbanization and poor management of natural resources, and also the inappropriate building architecture, higher electricity consumption. These are all enhancing the carbon footprint in the region. Now, when you look at unplanned urbanization, with that we lost the ecosystem, the pollutant level has gone up, which is leading to the warming of the earth. With the warming of the earth, we have changes in climate. That means one foolish action by us in the locally is contributing to the global problem. In the process, we are also paying the price for that. Okay, now let's see how we have done the planning in Bangalore. When you look at the way the Bangalore landscape has changed, Bangalore is about 740 square kilometers. In 1973, we had 68% green cover. Green is vegetation or tree cover. Red is the building, and blue is the water body. Yellow is the open space. Now, if you look at 2019, 81% of the landscape is covered with the red, and only 3% or 4% is under green. As per the Government of India norm, we are supposed to have 33% green cover. See, why we need 33% green cover? When we have 33% green cover, that particular landscape will support the population with the adequate oxygen and water. Now, Bangaloreans are losing both oxygen as well as the water. Now, let us see what is likely to happen in 2025. So, 1973, you saw that most part of the Bangalore was green. 92 with industrialization, Pune and Koramangala, you see changes happening. Then 2000, ITPT coming up at the outskirts. Then 2006, you see intensification happening, 2009. And 2017, it is about 78%. And our prediction shows, or our analysis shows that during the past 4.5 decades, there has been 1055% increase in the concrete area. Everywhere we are just filling with the cement. And we have lost 88% vegetation and 79% of the water body. The vegetation and water body acts as a heat sink, and also they help in removing the carbon from the atmosphere. The terrestrial trees remove the carbon. Similarly, the algae in the water body also does the job of carbon sequestration. Now, when we remove these two, we are emitting more, but at the same time, we do not have the entities to remove the carbon from the environment. That is where we are contributing more and more to the global environment, the carbon footprint. Okay. Now, this we did the visualization of the change. I will not get into the details of that. And our prediction shows that this year it's about 93% is under red, and by 2025 it would be 98.5% of the landscape would be concretized. Only places like IISC, the Lalbagh, Kaban Park, probably the GKVK, if the Karnataka government bureaucracy doesn't interfere, will have those green cover. Otherwise, most part of the city will lose the vegetation, and we are losing now. Earlier, people talked about outer ring road. They said the city is growing, we should allow the city to grow. They said that would be the limit. Today, people are talking about PRR. So then they will come up with OPRR. So there won't be end to these fellows thing because they do not know how to do the planning and make the city or region livable. Their interest is only to mismanage the system, which will make them more rich. That's what this bureaucracy the current decision makers want. In the process, we are contributing to the global warming. Now, what are the consequences of this unplanned urbanization? As I said earlier, we lost green cover. And today, there are some people using the oxygen cylinder, not because of COVID. It is because of less oxygen in the environment. And lakes are polluted and abused. They are also becoming contributor of methane and carbon dioxide emission. Then, of course, we have contaminants in the food chain. And there is an enhanced GHG footprint, or air quality is poor, and there are frequent flooding, and groundwater table is declining, and there is an increase in temperature in the region. Okay. Now, our study shows what is the tree cover. Again, using remote sensing data, we analyze. There's a 1.4 million trees for the 9.5 million population. That means for every 7%, one tree is there. What is required is for every person, 7 trees are required. We all, when we breathe, we give out carbon dioxide to an extent of 540 to 980 grams per person per day. 1 hectare of trees removes about 6 to 8 tons of carbon per year. By that ratio, for every human being, there has to be 7 trees. That is why we are supposed to keep 33% green cover in any region, so that it will support the people in the region with the adequate oxygen. Okay. Now, this is a summary of what I said about unplanned urbanization. Now, let us see which are the sectors contributing to the emission. We have various sectors: domestic, transport, industry, agriculture, livestock, etc. We have done the sector-wise analysis in the thing. That paper is available online. Those who are interested can download this paper, GHG footprint of the major cities in India. When you see that analysis, you will be surprised to see the cities where the public transport is very weak, like Bangalore and Hyderabad. You see the transportation sector is contributing high in the GHG footprint. That is as high as 43% in Bangalore, and Hyderabad is about 56%. And if you see the other sector, the most interesting other part is where the cities where the mismanagement is there. You say about 5 to 10% is the emission come from the waste, both solid and liquid waste. That is where we need to manage the solid and liquid waste. It not only contaminates our food chain, it also is contributing to the global warming. Now the message here is, if you want to lower the carbon footprint, you improve the public transport. Cut down the private, the two-wheeler use in the system. Today, our study shows 60 to 70% are the two-wheelers, and another 20 to 25% is the four-wheeler, single user four-wheeler. So they are contributing to the global warming. Okay. Now another architecture, which is again not conducive to the tropical climate like Bangalore, Hyderabad, or Chennai, is this glass facade building. We did the survey to find out what is the kind of the electricity requirement in a building such as this compared to the normal building where there are not much glass facade. We did a sample survey of about 2,800 households, and our study shows wherever the normal buildings are there, the electricity consumption per person per year, if it is 750 to 1,700 units per year per person. In the glass facade building, it is about 14,000 to 15,000 units per person per year. That means 14,000 to 15,000 kilowatt hour per person per year. That means almost 10 times higher electricity consumption. As you all know, higher the electricity consumption means higher is the greenhouse gas emission and higher is the instances of global warming. That means one mistake of the architect of the city, the copy paste, this architecture is supposed to be for temperate climate, the cold climate, where you are supposed to conserve the heat so that people feel the comfortable inside the building in the cold environment. Unfortunately, that architecture is copied by our architects and engineers. They have brought it and placed it in Bangalore and Hyderabad and Chennai, and we are contributing more to the global warming because of this kind of the bad architecture, not suitable for a tropical climate. Okay. Now this article received a wide attention. In addition, it was discussed in the parliament also. I had responded to that, and of course, media also covered this in a wide way. And when you look at the lakes are polluted and abused. Of course, rainwater harvesting is very suboptimal. That the Dr. Vishwanath is there, he will touch upon. I hope he will do that. Then there is no reduce, reuse, recycle of wastewater. Everybody talks about sewer diversion, river diversion. These are all fool's ideas. Elite people can sit in Bangalore, talk about all these things, but we need to understand the implication of not doing it. They're not treating the sewage, etc. Now, see, these give the picture of how the lake is being abused. Solid waste dumping happens, then liquid waste from the building come to the lake, then those who are away send it through the tanker, and lake which are supposed to be like this comes like this. And also the contaminants, when it get into the water, it also get into our food chain. You see through the fish, and also this green leaf, green vegetable comes as a fodder to the animal. In the process, our milk also get contaminated, and also people grow vegetable in the downstream. When we analyze all these samples, the fish, vegetable, and the fodder, we found heavy metal in these samples. That means there are heavy metal getting into the human food chain, biotic food chain, human and animal food chain, which is also resulting in the increase in cancer and kidney failure in the city. The city where kidney failure was 1 in 1 lakh about 10 years back or 12 years back, today it is 1 in 5,000. We are not only contributing to the global warming, we are also making people to suffer with the deadly diseases like cancer, kidney failure, etc. If the people have cancer, kidney failure, now today the COVID, they will not live forever. So these are the other implications. Okay. Now this is the situation we have reached. We have less oxygen. There's no water, and kidneys are failing. Of course, the brain also for some people who are in the stone building does not work. Okay. So now when you look at the other sector which is contributing to the emission, it is the solid waste dumping. We did the mapping of the city to find out where all people dump the solid waste. These are the huge dumps what we have mapped, and at each site we have found out what is the composition of the waste and how much the emission it happened. That's how I said 5 to 8% emission comes from the waste sector is based on this analysis, because large fraction of the waste is organic. As it decays, it emits the methane and carbon dioxide. That's how it contributes to the increase of the carbon footprint in the region. Now, if you have handled the waste, there is no waste in the system. If you understand the food chain, you see that as this a food chain, you have producer, then herbivore and carnivore. You see that material and energy transfer happening. Whatever is left in the system is converted into elemental form by this bacteria and fungi who acts as the environmental engineer. So that means there is no waste in an environment when people are organic. But unfortunately, since we use too much of synthetic, like plastic, etc., we are contributing to the waste accumulation in the system. When organic and the inorganic fraction combine together, naturally, it's very difficult to manage. In the process, people dump the waste, and the huge dump lead to the methane emission and increase in the global warming. Now, what can be done? In fact, I'll take another 2-3 minutes. I'll try to wind up. The one is we need to bring awareness among the people, especially the youngsters. We do that environmental education through the schools and colleges, and also we organize a symposium popularly known as Lake Symposium once in 2 years. This is a biennial lake symposium. We started in '98. The 12th event is going to be in December. If possible, you can create few lakes and plant native sapling. That's what we are trying to do wherever we get a time and opportunity. So this is our campus. You can see the greenery in the campus. And also this is a lake in the campus where we have otter and diverse the fish and other biota. And also this is the kind of the mini forest what we have in front of this the department. And also we have a Western Ghats climber in the campus, which again is all done by us. Okay. Now, if you want to know more about it, you are most welcome to take part in the Lake Symposium that is going to be during 28th to 30th December. We have both the classroom interaction as well as the webinars will be there. So those who are taking part are most welcome to register, and you can take part through the webinar. If you are worried of COVID and don't want to meet us in person, you can at least virtually you can listen to us. Okay, these are the kinds of the work the kids do. They understand how much carbon is stored by the trees. These kids, when they do this kind of experiment, they come to our Lake Symposium. One day is exclusively for the kids. In the 3-day event, one day is for the school kids and the college students and teachers. And similarly, the kids do the mapping of the lake catchment and water quality assessment. You can see the kids have been trained in the orientation program, and kids go and collect the sample, they analyze. And similarly, in the rural area, the kids do the mapping of biodiversity in their respective villages. We have the orientation program for the kids in rural area. And we have the similar thing for the other arid region also, like Davangere, etc. So, and the kids who do very well, they will come to our Lake Symposium. This gives a glimpse of the thing. It's a forum where young brain also interact with the experts, national and international experts, and the decision makers. The large number of the decision makers, the ministers and the bureaucrats attend our symposium. And we also have a capacity building for in the area of environmental management and the municipal solid waste management during September to December. 18th session we have announced. The session would for the current year will start in the month of September. So, and our study shows the country landscape has enough energy, the solar energy. We also are trying to see that whether biofuel can meet the requirement in transportation sector so that we can lower the carbon emission. Solar also is bringing down the carbon. And if you have a sensible youth, certainly our country would be the developed country by 2024, and we will have a sustainability also. See, this is the article that is available. Those who are interested can go through this web page. When you access my research page, the page looks like this. You will get the symposium details and also our publication. You can download all these publications, whichever you are interested, arrange the theme wise, similarly related to lakes, etc. So that's a large number of youngsters take part in our research, and they do a very good job. When they do a good job, they keep smile on everybody's face. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope if there are any queries, I'll get back after Dr. Vishwanath's presentation.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. I think very deep insights and all the research work that you have done in and around Karnataka. Thanks to you and your team, actually. I think the maps that you actually showed about Bangalore, they're quite alarming. I'm sure, people must actually, take some, ask around with them, and then I'm sure Vishwanath sir would talk about that as well. So I now hand over to Vishwanath sir to take over and then present his case.
Right. So let me start sharing my screen. Dipti, is that visible now?
Yes, sir. You're good.
So is it full screen now?
Yes, yes.
All right. So thanks to Dr. T.V. Ramchandra, he's painted a wide canvas and a deep canvas and has done a meticulous and thorough job as usual. So there's nothing that is there for me to talk on the bigger global climate change. I'll sort of restrict my talk to some small examples of how the small fits in with the big as what people can do, because I'm talking about everyday life. And I'm also making the point that science is a way of thinking rather than a body of knowledge, as Carl Sagan used to say. And it's important for us as people who occupy society now in times of pandemic or in other times to pursue the way of science as much as is possible. And therefore to back our work, our experience with research and data, right? And that's how we progress with everything, including climate science, because it's taken thousands of scientists working long hours with lots of data for us to know for a certainty that climate change is upon us and that we are in the age of the Anthropocene. So what is the impact of climate change? Some of the impacts Dr. TVR already highlighted, but suffice to say it's already widespread. It affects different geographies differently. We got the example of what's happening in Kodagu, what's happening in Kerala, what's happening in Bihar, for example, where floods are a common thing, right? We also know that in summertime, vast areas of India are impacted by drought. And this has a direct bearing on the farming community and the agricultural community and the pastoral community. It affects different livelihoods in a different sense, right? In urban areas, we tend to be cocooned from the impact of climate change because we have institutions which sort of buffer us from feeling the direct pressure, right? But in rural areas and small towns, this buffering action is very limited. So if your borewell goes dry, then you have no other source of water. Here, you could source it from a tanker, or you could source it from piped water supply, or you could buy bottled water. That luxury is not there for many people. And what climate change actually does is it amplifies what already is a natural crisis for us, like floods and droughts. It amplifies it manifolds. And ideally, when we talk about ourselves as individuals, as acting on it, and even as institutions, adaptation to climate change and mitigation should go hand in hand. If we are able to get both of them going simultaneously, then we are living with what climate change is dealing to us, but we're also making sure that climate change effects are mitigated to some extent. Yeah. We're lucky because we're now in an era of technology. So remote sensing, satellite imagery, everything gives us almost real-time picture of what's happening. This is the Indian monsoon, and the monsoon is everything for us, as we know. And 4 months of monsoon, we have to store for 12 months and make sure that we engage in agriculture, industry, urban water consumption. But also remember that with this kind of technology, we're able to granularly say now what is the likely impact of climate change on what particular area. So the absence of evidence is no longer an excuse. We have all the evidence, as Dr. TVR also produced before us, in terms of the destruction of the Western Ghats, of what's happening with landslides, what's happening with floods. The only excuse that we can think of, it cannot be inaction. We have to act. We have to act, and we have to act as of today. So that's something that we have to remember. Because let's go a bit into the past. Now, this is a situation in Bangalore, which many people don't know if you're from the city of Bangalore, that we went through a famine and a drought. Now, in this modern era, you cannot think of famine at all occurring because we have the knowledge systems, the governance systems in place to make sure that drought does not cause famine. In the old days, drought would cause famine very quickly in many ways. And because we put science to practice in the form of technology, we found some answers in the past. So when we found famine and drought in Bangalore when all the lakes dried up for 3 years and there was great difficulty in sourcing water and about 1 lakh people died in what was then Mysore kingdom, we took up the first pipe water supply, Hesarghatta. We started to bring water from the Arkavati river as a reservoir and started supplying it to Bangalore city. So therefore, we made ourselves resilient to drought and to water shortage through a system of water supply from a river. This has continued, and in 1894 we used technology, we used steam engine, and then we used electricity to bring water to ourselves. So we were moderating the demand that we had put on the ecosystem because supply was abundant, right? There was no shortage of water, the population was less, and the resource was plenty, and we assumed that the resource would be forever plenty. We've now run into ceilings of resource availability, so the old answers of supply side will no longer suffice. There is no water in the river, so where will you pump it from, right? You cannot think of now saying that I'll go 400 kilometers or 500 kilometers, which is a foolish endeavor. So what do we do to make sure that our demand and our supply meet together and that what climate change throws upon us, we are able to counteract almost at an individual level? Let's pick simple things, right? Dr. TVR already pointed out the urban heat island effect. One way of mitigating the impact of urban heat island effect and of climate change globally is to just get white roofs or green roofs, right? The white reflective paints can reflect off the heat incident on the rooftop, and if the city itself is covered in white roofs, there would be a tremendous impact on the city and the temperatures would drop. At least it would be a mitigation step because the house inside would be cooler because the heat is reflected out, and therefore, and it would be an adaptation step there because the house would be cooler, and a mitigation step because we would be sort of reducing the impact of climate change. Or a green roof. Now that's again an adaptation because drought is prevalent everywhere, and if you can get a green roof on top of your terrace, it keeps the house cooler, but it also is a productive roof. As you will see, it's possible now to imagine the 7 trees per person, which Dr. TVR advocates. That should be a goal that we should aim for, but we could also aim for making sure that our terraces are productive terraces, like, for example, rice growing on the rooftop. Now, science and technology gives us the knowledge and the system and the ability to do these kind of things. We now have to design multi-purpose spaces everywhere, which are green, which are productive, and which reduce the impact of climate change. The same rooftop the white rooftop that I was showing you can pick up water, rainwater. And because the rooftop is with a paint which has no heavy metal in it, it can be cleaned easily. What you find is that if you harvest the rainwater and you check the water for quality, we have a standard called BIS 10500. If you check the rainwater quality, it's amazing. You can get drinking water quality on top of your terrace, right? Why then do you have to ship it from the Kaveri or from borewells which are 1,400 to 1,800 feet? Now imagine a scenario that every rooftop in Bangalore is white or green. Every rooftop is harvesting rainwater. We're already starting to impact the pressure that we're putting on natural resources. Look what happens in villages, simple things that can be done. Now this is a village in Mulbaga Taluk in Kolar called Mini Jainhalli. The drains would be choked with plastic and rubbish, all sorts of rubbish, and the water would stagnate and cause vector-borne diseases. Now, a lady took the lead and the villagers got together. They made sure that the drains were all cleaned up. They stocked it up in a farm pond. This is domestic wastewater. It has no industrial effluents in it. They diluted it with groundwater and with rainwater. And then the farmer now, with the help of the farm pond, uses it for irrigation purpose, right? Now, he's mitigating the impact of climate change, which causes drought or the depletion of groundwater. And he's doing a favor to the community because the drains are kept clean by the farmer, and there are no vector-borne diseases because vector-borne diseases are getting more prominent nowadays. So some simple steps can be taken which make common sense, which provide livelihood for people, which also help reduce the burden of disease on people. The other impact that I've seen in Bangalore is to look at groundwater. Groundwater is 65% of India's water requirement. The city of Bangalore alone, 4 lakh borewells and about 500 MLD to 700 million liters per day may be coming from groundwater. But as TVR pointed out, it's all being concretized now, so there's no space for water to percolate in, and the tanks and lakes are being filled up or are full of polluted water, so there's no percolation in. Now, how about every house and every building being mandated to recharge the runoff which comes from their house? If you're collecting it in rain barrels and some tanks and using it, good. Otherwise, pick up road runoff, pick up runoff from the rooftop, filter it, make sure it's not contaminated, and push it into what are called recharge wells. How about if we get 1 million recharge wells in Bangalore? How about if we put half of the rainfall in Bangalore into our aquifers, clean water aquifers? What would happen is that the groundwater table would come up, we would have less of urban flooding, and we would have water from these wells which take only 0.1 unit of energy per kiloliter, that is for 1,000 liters. The same water, if it comes from the Kaveri, takes 2 units of energy per 1,000 liters. Now, 2 units of energy is equal to 2 units of carbon emission, right? Whereas you reduced it to 0.1 by getting the groundwater table up, the aquifer up, and then you're using the water for yourself. You've got water resilience, sustainability, and you have mitigated the impact of carbon emission and energy generation and energy use. So we need to work on design and science. We need to redo the way we design our stormwater drains. We can design them for infiltration into the ground more and more instead of barreling it out into the outside into valleys and causing flooding. Institutions can do it. IIS is already doing many wonderful things. This is Indian Institute of Management, where stormwater is picked up and pushed into the aquifer, not allowed to go out of the campus. Now, what that means is that it provides enough soil moisture and aquifer water for the trees to grow. So we enhance biodiversity by rainwater harvesting, one way of looking at things. Lakes and wetlands have now to be managed in a way different fashion than what it used to be in the past. We now are in an era of urbanization where we must take wastewater, make sure that it is treated as effectively as possible and all pollutants are removed. We should push it into wetlands, as Dr. TVR and group have shown in Jagpur Lake. You clean it up further in the wetland and push it into the lake, which works as an algal pond and allows for biodiversity, allows for the lake to be rejuvenated, allows for wetlands to flourish, bird biodiversity to flourish, and groundwater to be recharged. So new imaginations of science is needed, new engagements of science and technology is needed, new understandings are needed. And we need to work at micro watershed level. And this is the example, classic example of Jagpur Lake and Rachenalli Lake, where we can revive the lake if we put our heads together and make sure that it's done in a scientific fashion. And then, of course, science as a provider of livelihoods. Now, if the lake is full of clean water, you get enormous quantities of fish. You should make sure that it's a native species, not foreign species which are introduced. And then it provides proteins, and then it provides proteins to the consumers and livelihoods to the people who fish. And of course, it adds to the bird biodiversity, which we have painted stars and great pelicans, which are also coming into this. So these are the new imaginations for our city, which we need, especially in cities like Bangalore, which are huge concrete islands, right? Now, with Dr. TVR, we've had many a debate, and he has a point of view and I have a point of view. I believe that if we take wastewater, which is in increasing quantities from the city, but treat it effectively, make sure that the pollutants, that there are no heavy metals, that the nitrates and phosphates are moderated, treat it well, and then feed it into the chain of tanks through wetlands as a process, then it can regenerate the aquifer, make sure that the drought-prone hinterland gets some volume of water, and then farmers get access to it as a livelihood. We should exercise great caution in terms of the treatment and the monitoring, but we have the capabilities of delivering it. There's a treatment plant in Cubbon Park where you actually take wastewater and treat it to drinking water standards. It's not an impossibility. So therefore, we need to find and do that more and more. TZ Apartments in Bangalore, another exemplar, 94 villas and flats. The gentleman on the right is Dr. Shekhar. He and the group came together and made a lot of recharge wells. But what they did also is set up a treatment system by which they take all their wastewater, push it through a sand filter, activated carbon filter, ozonizer, and an RO system, and then actually drink their own wastewater. Right? This is the first example of its kind in India. We quote often the example of Singapore or Namibia. But in India and in Bangalore, you find a set of apartments who put science and technology into business and put their money where their mouth is and actually drink the water, wastewater, by blending it with groundwater. These kind of examples need to increase. Phosphates from detergents, surfactants and phosphates in detergents are a huge nuisance. As we work on the detergent ecosystem to make sure that they clean up their act, take extended producer responsibility and make sure that their detergents are not polluting, what we as individuals can do is to plant in this city hundreds and thousands of arita trees, or what was called as Antwalad Kai in Kannada, or the soap nut or the soap berry. And the same soap berry can be just boiled in water and make for an excellent detergent, soap, shampoo, and dishwasher. Now, simple things where we integrate landscapes, tree cultivation to our use in daily life through the knowledge that science provides us is one way ahead as we combat detergent pollution of our lakes and rivers. Aerators, simple devices which reduce water by 50%. This should be common in every house because every drop of water saved means so much less energy required to pump it into our home and therefore means so much less carbon emissions. Foot pedals, like now in the era of COVID, when you have to do hands-free washing, foot pedal-based taps can help you save water and conserve water. Conserving water, conserving energy, conserving fuel, protecting our trees, these are the way to go. For the bold and adventurous, there's no such thing as waste in science, right? You can have an eco-sanitation system, a urine diverting dry toilet, as it is called. Urine is laden with nutrients, NPK, micronutrients. You just dilute it and you apply it to the fertilizers as fertilizer to the pots on top of the decks. You have an excellent plant growth. The solids can be composted for 6 to 8 months with kitchen compost, and then they also make for excellent soil conditioners. So even the human toilet can be converted to a fertilizer factory as a resource, provided we put the right application of science to it. This is a squatting type of composting toilet. So these are the sort of brave new worlds we have to start to occupy. Gray water treatment systems, simple washing machine and bath water, you can treat it in your own house and reuse it in your own house for toilet flushing or for gardening. These are not rocket science, these are simple devices that can come up. So in actuality, if you take 100 square meter of terrace area, as TVR was pointing out, that glass facade buildings from the temperate zone are enormously destructive of our cities. But how about a house which is built with earth, which is taken from the site itself, from the basement? Then look at what all the 100 square meter can do. It can give you all the water that you need. It can grow you 200 kgs of rice and vegetables. It can treat all the gray water, consume all the waste from the toilets, compost all the solids from the kitchen, provide space for 32 different species of birds and insect biodiversity, light up 12 bulbs, cook using a solar cooker for 4 people, and so on and so forth. So it's just our lack of imagination and a drive to get that imagination going that is holding us back. We should use that more and more and at scale if we want to combat climate change to some degree possible. And finally, this is my last but one slide. What we have to realize is that our soil and that the fact that it rains is what keeps us going. All across India, 70 to 80% of the rain that falls is held in the soil medium and then is evaporated or evapotranspired, and the forests, soils and forests together. Unless we make up a plan to protect our soils and forests, we will not be able to tackle climate change the way we should. Many engagements are necessary from the individual level, from a simple thing as changing your soap to the complex thing, as was pointed out, as protecting the Western Ghats, protecting the forest reserves. Because what you learn is, again, quoting Carl Sagan, the favorite scientist of mine, that if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first create the universe. Everything is interlinked. We cannot tamper with nature in one place and hope that it will sort itself out. Everything has an effect. And therefore, we have to understand the whole ecosystem and move around with it, with science, to be able to address the challenges that our times face. Yeah, thank you very much. This is all I had to share with you, and I'm looking forward to some discussion.
Thank you, Vishwanath sir. I think you did bring out all the innovative and eco-friendly techniques that one as an individual can adopt, of course, along as a community as well, right? So we'll move on to the panel discussion now. We have a couple of questions that are already posted to us, and probably start reading out. You can answer. Either of you can take it up. So the very first question that Vishnu has asked us is, what fraction of public are really aware of the effects of climate change today in our society? Are we aware of that?
In fact, everyone is aware of the impact of the climate change. We are all experiencing it. Coming to the science part of climate change, or the causal factor, probably it's less than 2% or a 2.5%. That's what our sample analysis shows. So it's actually, when I travel in rural area, people are aware. Whereas when it comes to the city, I would say that the awareness is less than 3.5 or a 2.5%. And also it is directly proportional to the level of conservation. See, for example, district like Shivamogga and Uttara Kannada, where environmental literacy is as high as 45 to 55%, I see the forest cover also is 45 to 55%. Whereas in Bangalore, environmental literacy is 3.5%, and we have tree cover of less than 4%. So there is a direct correlation. That's what our study has brought out. Okay, I saw there are a couple of questions from the same gentleman. Vishwanath, if you permit me, I will answer that. I have noted down those, this one. One other thing is, apart from global warming, what are the major reasons for climate change? There are changes in climate happening naturally. But global warming is triggering the thing. For global warming, this one, with our more and more carbon, we are making the situation much worse. Earlier, maybe in 100 years cycle or 200 year cycle, we would have seen the change. But now every alternate year, we are facing the crisis. So that is the implication of climate change. The triggering factor is emissions from carbon emission or greenhouse gas footprint increase from anthropogenic source is the major thing. So that is where we need to understand that. Then is there a national body or specifically for combating climate change? Yes, we have a wonderful ministry called the Ministry of Forest, Environment and Climate Change, but hardly I see work happening there. Even in Karnataka government, we have the Center for Climate Change. For example, MPRI has that center, and we have come out with a very good the document on how to mitigate the climate change. But implementation is lacking in our state also. And Gujarat has a good the particular ministry itself for change for the climate change. So that way there are some initiatives at many levels. Probably that's why we see that there is no total devastation. There is a devastation happening because of some interventions are happening here and there. Then the next question is about solar and wind energy. See, I'm not saying that we should completely remove the coal and this one. If you can reduce the use of coal and the fossil fuel, we are bringing down the emission by that extent. Because the energy sector contributes about 29 to 32% in emission. If I reduce it by 5% by the renewable source of energy like solar and wind, I have brought down the emission by that percentage. Now, we are fortunate. I see the large scale intervention in the solar as well as wind energy sector throughout the country wherever the potential is there, because these are all location specific. That is what we need to keep in mind. I cannot talk about wind energy everywhere. Where the wind velocity is there, there only I can have wind power plant, etc. Then there is another interesting question, probably on my last slide, on can we use biodiesel? In fact, Government of India has embarked on a massive program on the biodiesel and the bioethanol. Converting agriculture residue instead of burning it on the roadside or in the villages, contributing to the global warming. Now there are incentives to convert into bioethanol. There are IITs have joined together. There is a consortium, and also the many other young researchers are working on converting the lignin-based the waste or even the macroalgae. One of my students is working on macroalgae to convert into bioethanol. We have seen the success there. Similarly, biodiesel from algae, microalgae. The marine, we have the vast stretch of marine in the southern India. We can capitalize on that. Already there are industries in Tamil Nadu working on some of the macroalgae. They are cultivating it. It's already commercialized. And the strength is that we have a vast section of the youngsters who can take up the science and can explore what our species are available, because our coast has not been explored. When my student took up the study in the West Coast, she didn't even know what other species are there because no one has worked on that. And what is the potential of that species from the biodiesel perspective? So, and biodiesel is a carbon neutral, because when the organism grows, it uses carbon. When you burn the biodiesel, of course, there is emission. The emission is lower than the carbon taken by the organism while growing. Okay. Now, the last part regarding global warming and the changes in climate, my warning is that, and our study clearly shows, all the animals will survive, not the human. For example, a frog, it has got the two stages in the life cycle. One is the tadpole stage, other one is the on the land. Now, the tadpole stage requires the water. If the water is not there, you will not have tadpole and animal will not survive. Now, the Philetus leucorrhina, a species in frog, has bypassed the tadpole stage. That is where when Vishwanath talked about adaptation, animals have learned how to get adapted to a situation when there is a crisis. In our case, we have not learned that, and in all probability, the human race will go extinct, whereas all the other animals will survive. That's what our experiment on the frogs have shown, and we brought those fertilized eggs to the lab, and 14 days we saw that instead of tadpole, we saw the young ones emerging out. So that means the organisms have the capability to get adapted, because continuing the progeny is an important thing in anybody's life cycle. The animals know that, whereas the humans will not survive. If there is a water scarcity, if the increase in temperature, we will pay the heavy price. And as rightly said, that we are responsible for the increase, escalating carbon footprint. Naturally, we have to pay the price. We need to wake up today. If we think of only GDP and go on destroying the ecosystem, our children will not have water nor the air, and we'll have unhealthy citizens in the country. Healthy citizens are asset to the country. Unhealthy citizens, we are going to pay the heavy price as we are paying today in the COVID situation. Economy also will collapse. If you destroy the ecosystem today, the economy will collapse tomorrow. If you conserve it, you will also have the GDP in a better shape. That's where both has to coexist. We need to take a message from that. I thank you all for that. Okay, listening to me. And of course, I have answered all the queries which I have
Sure,
noted
sir.
down. If there are any other queries, I would be happy to do that.
Certainly, sir. So, Vishnu, this is to you. Probably, you highlighted different, techniques that one could use there. So, there's one question which says that the south side of Karnataka might be going to face water scarcity very soon in future. So, what do you recommend, to common people out there, and maybe to government also on this? What can one do?
I would also like to take the question with Dr. TVR took on, are we as citizens aware about climate change, right? Unfortunately, my feeling is that we are not, as a group. We still don't understand, or our minds still don't cannot grapple with the fact of what is happening around us, because it's so incremental and it's happening. And you know that in the politics of the climate change, you have the greatest denier in the President of the United States, right? So denial and lack of awareness sort of runs through us. It has nothing to do with education. It's a sort of fantasy world we occupy, and we do not want to tackle reality. And that is the biggest challenge for us, both as scientists and as communicators, as to how do we get the message across to ordinary people in a sense, in a way that it becomes part of their life to be able to address it. And here's the other thing, the conundrum, right? It's generally the rich consumer who has created the problem. It's the richer countries, and within the richer countries, the richer people, and within our own country, those who consume the most, who have created the problem. The impact of the problem is unfortunately felt by the poorest, who have no role to play in actually causing the global warming. Right? Now, how do we engage those who have been impacted, who are not responsible for it, to act on it? This becomes a big challenge. And so we are caught in this trap of not being able to persuade the polluters to become more responsible, for which the current institutional governance is proving itself completely inadequate. As rightly pointed out, they're simply not able to tackle the rich emitters. Right? The rich polluters are going scot-free. So how do we do that? I don't have an answer to it. Now, specifically to the question of Southern Karnataka, we have to prepare for what is called a new normal, in which droughts and floods are going to occur frequently. So then we have to develop a strategy by which our soils are fortified. Our soils lack carbon, they lack biodiversity. They have been depleted of all nutrients, and they've been doused with fertilizers and pesticides for a long, long time. We have to make sure that we regenerate our soil and get back soil moisture and the health of our soil. We have to protect our old growth forests. Somehow this notion that we can cut old trees and plant 10 saplings and that will compensate is such a foolish notion and so ingrained within us. How do we make sure that we protect our old forests, the Western Ghats, the rich biodiversity, the wetlands that we have? I don't think we are doing anything sufficient to do that. And unless we do that, we will face a crisis of water, as has been pointed out in Southern Karnataka. So this calls for the complete reformation and the transformation of the institutions of governance, who have to address it more detailed, plus a people's movement which pushes the government to be able to do it. These things are not emerging strong enough, and we have to work on it. I think Dr. TVR will also agree with this, that we need change at both levels, the grassroots level to put pressure on the system, and the system to change the rich and the large consumers.
Certainly, I think early action saves lives. So there's one question that says, there are scientists who hold that climate change is due to natural causes and not man-made causes. What's your take? I mean, both of you can take it.
I mean, beyond
They have given the
this
data and demonstrated that. Even after that, if they are doing like Trump, I should send them to Trump's country only. Okay.
yeah, I mean, so here's
Another
the
thing I
thing.
will
Why is
also
it
tell
that
regarding the
we're not?
water scarcity. Commissioner, 1 second.
Yeah.
The water, this one. See, one is we need to map the region depending on the water availability, and we should have appropriate crop. You know, in a place where there's a water scarcity, growing paddy or sugarcane. See, paddy requires about 3,000 liters of water per kg, while sugarcane requires about 5,000 to 7,000 liters per kg. There we should have grown millet or pulses. For example, pulses requires only 200 liters per this one. At the same time, it maintains the soil nutrient as Dr. Vishwanath was mentioning. See, that is where we need to do. That is where the government of Karnataka also should map and say you shall grow only this crop in this region. Should not allow these big fellows to play the trick. If you look at who are the fellows who are growing sugarcane, these are all mafia. You know, in a region where the wild animal problem is there, they deliberately grow the sugar cane so that wild animal come and attack them, and then they can ask for the compensation. In those villages, we should make it a mandatory that you grow only the millet or the pulses so that there is no human-animal conflict in the region. So that is where the enterprising decision makers can solve this problem, while the arrogant, the illiterate fellows will create the mess. That's what is happening in throughout the country today. Also, we have that section of society has got into the decision making, and we have to pay the price. And we have the colonial mindset in our decision making. You know, colonial rulers came to the country. Their agenda was to loot and take it to their country. In our now, the colonial mindset bureaucracy is doing exactly that. They know only the looting, but not delivering the goods to the for the society or for the public. So that trend we need to change. Probably this kind of discussions might bring awareness among the youngsters. They might turn out to be different. I am looking for such people, because I have seen after listening to our talk, youngsters have taken up some of the things. For example, I come across one youngster who started nurturing plants, the Western Ghats species, and he has planted around 350,000 plants without making any noise. You know, no media knows about his effort and all. The university, if they want Western Ghats plant, he will supply that. And on his own, on every June 5th, he will go to some school, make sure school children does the planting. About 3 lakh plants he has done. Like that, you know, the people who are in rural area who have understood the problem of climate change, they have understood how to mitigate it. They have their own ways of handling it. And of course, they have water also. Because wherever native species forests are there, we saw the water availability in the stream for 12 months. Wherever we saw the monoculture plantation, it is only 6 to 8 months. Wherever degraded landscape, it's only the 4 months. That clearly shows that when people want water, they need to have forest. Then only they can exist. That's where in the Western Ghats region, we have a patch of forest called Devara Kadu or sacred growth. That is kept by elders deliberately so that they can have the water sustenance in the region, so that there can be the economic security for the family also. And that is even today when I do the experiment across the Western Ghats in the sacred groves, I see that the water availability in their wells all the 12 months. If you come to Varda Basin, then you see there is a drought situation. Whereas where the sacred groves are there, people have plenty of water. So that's where if you need water, you need to catch rain. The best way is, as Vishwanath talked about it, in the urban area, rooftop, etc. But wherever land is there, please plant the thing so that soil moisture is maintained, and also infiltration happens. When infiltration happens, after monsoon recedes, that infiltrated water will come to the lake or river. That's how we have water for all the 12 months. That's what our experiment has shown, and we published that in the current science. Is available online. Those who are interested can just have that article also. Okay. Yeah,
Certainly,
I have
sir.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vishwanath was saying something. I just interrupted.
No. You did. So there was this question about tap water, that many slums dependent on it have unclean and unhygienic. So here's the thing again, because the poor bear the burden of lack of investment in infrastructure, we should not make them spend more to get clean water. Ideally, in the Bangalore context or in any city context, the slums must have first right on the pipe network. every pipe that, if the BWSSB brings water to the city, the slums must get the connection first because those people cannot afford it. What has happened now, unfortunately, is people like us, if I get water in my house from the Bangalore Water Supply Sewerage Board, and I consume 20,000 liters of water a month, I'm getting a subsidy of 1,600 rupees a month. Rich people are getting subsidies of 1,600. The poor, if you have to buy one bindige of water in summer, one pot of water, you have to pay sometimes 5 rupees, right? 5 rupees for 15 liters. I pay 7 rupees for 1,000 liters. So this disconnect of governance, this right of the poor to as first right on the resource should be first established. Universal connection is the way to go. The rich can do rainwater harvesting or stuff like that I was saying, recharge, because they have the monies to be able to do it. They have the large roof spaces to be do it. So it should be mandated on the rich to do all these good things for common for pool, right? And the poor should get the subsidy and should get the connection. That's the way we have to do it. The one other point that I wanted to mention, Dipti, was the sort of profound disconnect between what we think individually, intellectually, and what we practice, right? So somewhere we have to align both of them. We have to live what we talk. A lot of people can grapple with an idea intellectually and then park it at some place and then go about in their merry ways, traveling all over the world with jet planes and cars and polluting the hell out of the ecosystem, right? How do we reconcile this differences is another challenge before us. And I don't know what there are no easy answers for it.
All right. I think Dr. T.V. Ramachandra did mention about, how the farming community is actually getting affected. So, I mean, especially climate change being, and it's accepted worldwide, but there's huge negative impact on the agricultural output. Now, what, we as scientists or science communicators can do about that, reaching out to farmers there?
See, actually, already the Karnataka government has come out with the adaptation and mitigation plan, wherein for the farm sector also they have talked about it. So earlier the document came in English, now it's available even in Kannada, it's available online. I would request everyone to download the document and read that. Maybe if required, we can have a brainstorm session and then see what can be done. So what is required is when a farmer understands the implication, they try to change. In fact, some of the farmers, the progressive farmers, when they read the document, they switched over to millet. They said that millet is the answer for the climate change. They will not have the economic loss by growing the millet because that will give the sustained the cash. This one compared to growing paddy or sugarcane, and then there is a loss because of the changes in climate. They have understood that millet is the answer. That's what is being done. In fact, one of our students, he has a land in Pavagada. Today, if you go to his land, you see that he has the lake in his this one. Water is there in Pavagada. Other part of Pavagada, you don't have water, but in his farm it is there. That is because he has an integrated approach of the farming, wherein he grows millet. There's not much water intensive. At the same time, he knows how to collect the water, whatever the small quantity comes, and also how to retain that water in the landscape when it is not raining. So you see that moisture level is also maintained there, and because of that. And today he is a visiting professor in Columbia University. He goes around telling the world what needs to be done. At the same time, he also is practicing it, and also he has put sensors to understand what is the increase in the soil moisture because of his initiative compared to the surrounding areas where such things are not there. So that is what we need to do. That's what we have to bring, that knowledge among the other sections of the farmers, so that probably we can address that thing. That is where, as people who know the thing, we need to go to the rural area, communicate to them. Then probably things will come. Probably the All India Radio should also take up this kind of thing. And now there is a program in All India Radio. After COVID, I see that program on Sunday is stopped now. But otherwise, there was a very good program on changes in climate, and there was a discussion. The people used to come and communicate very effectively. Probably that kind of thing we need to do it. That is also a way to answer the COVID. Okay.
Yeah. So I think Vishwanath, sir, there's one comment that says rainwater harvesting can be done only by the rich is a very wrong idea. So could you just elaborate on that?
I'm not saying that it can only be done by the rich. It can be done by everybody. I mean,
right.
talking about it for 35 years now. See, here's what happens. Rainwater harvesting, those who have large spaces, large rooftops, large lands, like large institutional spaces, have the capacity to do more rainwater harvesting. They have the monies to invest and make sure that they harvest. So it should be made mandatory that they should do it. It should not be so for the poor. It doesn't mean that the poor can or cannot do it. They can do it, they can harvest rainwater at all. But there's a difference. If you have a 20 square meter small hut or a thatch roof, you cannot collect as much rainwater as somebody who has a 5,000 square meter roof, right? So therefore, there's a built-in anti-democracy about rainwater harvesting itself, based on the access to land and based on access to rooftop. My point is, make it compulsory for those who have the wherewithals to do it, and allow the poor to work on the subsidies, to have access to resources on which they should have first right. You cannot make it that I get water from the BWSSB in Bangalore and I get a subsidy of 1,600 rupees a month, and then the poor fellow is asked to do rainwater harvesting or to manage water on his own. No, he should get or she should get the BWSSB connection, and I should do rainwater harvesting and substitute for the resource. That's the point that I was trying to make.
Okay, yeah. There's a very interesting question that says there are two things that are running parallelly. One, at individual level, people are trying to save climate, like say, lake conservation that TVR sir said. And then there's another side where, there's this rich mafia that's trying to destroy. So who may win? There's a question there. So any thoughts on that?
Well, it is as good as saying Satyameva Jayate. Finally, we all will succeed, but they might have upper hand when there's no water. Finally, they will come to us asking for the solution. So that's what I have noticed in the places. See, one other thing I would like to clarify, which Vishwanath also touched upon regarding the wastewater treatment and supply to rural area. My argument has been, and the article which I have written also clearly says, give that, but don't give a contaminated water, saying that it is treated wastewater. See, giving the wastewater treated to the secondary level without removing nutrient and heavy metal, they are creating a mess. That's what my objection to supplying water to Kolar or Chikballapur is, that unless you, in fact, in my criticism, I had written that they should have the wetland plus the constructed wetland plus algal pond before giving it to the rural area, so that will remove the heavy metal. So where Vishwanath also says that we should give the thing, only the thing is, he also emphasized that we should not give contaminants to our rural people, because the food they grow, we will get it again. So if we give the heavy metal, then we'll get it back, as it is happening in Vartur and Belandur catchment. The downstream, all those green vegetable, radish, etc., which is grown has heavy metal. That is coming to the Bangalore market, city market, and other markets. So we are consuming that. That's where we are paying the price. That's where my objection is. Anybody supplying a contaminated water, I am against that. We have technology to remove that. Why not do that than giving contaminated water and just fetch the vote? These fellows who want only vote, they are not worried of the health of the people. That is what my objection. That's why people are unhappy about my stand. They don't get vote. We need to make sure when people like me and Vishwanath start talking, probably we'll make sure that only clean water goes to Kolar and Chikballapur and any part of the India. In fact, in my article, I already have said that I have a 5R formula. First R is a responsible citizen. When people are responsible, they will allow the rejuvenation of lake. When they rejuvenate the lake, I can retain the rainwater in the lake. For example, Bangalore topography receives the rainfall of the 700 to 850 millimeter, which is equivalent to 15 TMC. If I do the rainwater harvesting, 70% of the water requirement of the city I can meet by the rainwater harvesting. One way of doing it is through whatever the rooftop harvesting, we should not talk about it. The next effective way is through the lakes. Lake has to be rejuvenated even in urban area, because lake provide the recreation, lake provide the groundwater recharge. So that's where we need to fill the lake with the rainwater. When we do that, and also second option is the wastewater treatment. If I am using 18 TMC of water, if I do the wastewater treatment, I get 16 TMC of water. 15 TMC because of rainwater, 16 TMC because of the wastewater treatment. I have 31 TMC in a city where the requirement is 18 TMC or 20 TMC. See, this is where innovative solutions are required. Innovative enterprising population is required. corrupt fellows, we have to knock them off. However strong, we have to remove that. Like people claiming climate change is not happening in spite of flooding and the landslide happening in the entire country. From north to south, we are facing the problem. Still, if somebody says that changes in climate is not happening, it is because of natural phenomena. My question is, demonstrate that flooding and the landslide has happened 100 years back in the same intensity as it is happening today. I have shown with the increased emission, the instances have increased in the country and we are paying the price. When I go to the farmers or the villagers in Kodagu or Chikmagalur or Dakshin Kannada, the children have died because of the landslide. They are paying the price. They understand the thing. Whereas sitting in Bangalore or Mumbai or Delhi, we can make a statement saying that changes in climate because we are sitting in air-conditioned room. Our thinking is to emit more, not mitigate or this one. That is where we have to change the mindset of our children. I'm sure this kind of forum will certainly make them children to understand. I do not know how many people are taking part in the thing. I really enjoyed the Vishwanath's presentation. So it was really listen. I often listen to his talk. Once in a while, I get enriched with his because he has a practical knowledge. What I have is practical plus theoretical thing. So when I got his insights, I get enriched in my knowledge. Thank you very much, Vishwanath, for that. Okay, thank you.
Pleasure is mine, sir, and I also always learn from you. So there's nothing but this that I have to say. There's a question on EIA 2020.
Yes, sir.
So an EIA is just an environmental impact assessment of a project which is taken up by anybody. It has nothing to do with climate change per se. But EIAs, if done well, can weigh in and make sure that the project does not have a negative component on climate change too, right? So that's where it stands.
All right. There's one question which says, we have these environmental policies that are, coming out. Has there been any policy which is, influenced by public opinion? Public opinion does matter if, any policy is framed. Now, has there been any situation where, because of people's voice, it has won over? Dr. PVR, any thoughts on that?
Actually, there has been some other thing. For example, national park designation. There is a law saying that whichever has a very vital taxes are there has to be conserved. When there are some kind of anomalies, when public raises a voice, certainly that it has helped in the difference. Now, as far as EIA notification is concerned, EIA, the 2006 notification, if you look at, and today, we have diluted so much. In the name of development and helping the industries, we have diluted. In fact, that's where when I wrote a letter to the ministry, I asked, 2006 notification you had, still we had this much degradation in the entire country. Now with your dilution, what is going to happen? And second thing is removing public hearing and post facto approval. These are not a good sign. So that's what in one of the article I have highlighted, which has come in the media also. So that's what we need to understand. See, the time taken for clearing the thing, now we can speed up the process, but not at the cost of diluting the norms. Polluter pay, instead of paying the penalty, if he is incentivized and allowed to pollute, then we'll have only contaminated food and water. We should not allow that to happen. So that is where, the citizens' voice is always makes a thing. Draft notification was supposed to, the public opinion was supposed to end in the last month sometime. When people started writing to the ministry, now they have extended it. So that means they will, that is where we need people who are sensible and responsible. When they are sensible, they will start rising, they understand their responsibility. When they raise their voice, we can make a change. We need change makers in this country. Such kind of people will contribute to the thing. So development can happen. But my only question to the government is development at what cost? If they are thinking only GDP and remove all my forests in the Western Ghats, then my people will not have water nor health or the sun. Then what kind of development is that? Already COVID is an indication of mismanagement of environment. The virus came from the wild. So of course, Chinese have manipulated that. If you look at this kind of zoonotic diseases come from the wild. For example, in my district, Shivamogga and Uttar Kannada, you see, we have monkey fever. Monkeys, when it comes home, the fever comes to the resident and people die. Why the monkeys come home? Because their food is deprived in the forest by monoculture plantation like acacia eucalyptus. and the fruit yielding trees are not there. That's why monkeys come home. When monkeys come, the ticks attached to the body also gets into the thing. That tick gets detached from the body and gets into the human. When they bite human, the virus get transferred to the human, and that's where we see that whoever has gone interacted with the forest, they are the ones who are dying in the Shumuga and this. Even this year, about 80 people are died because of that monkey fever or KFD disease. That is where we need to understand. We are going to pay the heavy price. We couldn't even answer the question of the small organism, COVID virus. We are talking about all the great things of GDP increasing and all. Have we answered that? So that is what is the requirement today. Okay. I would say if you want to answer, you come to the district of Shivamogga or Uttarakhanda. I have not seen the COVID problem with the local residents who take a diverse food, they are immune to the thing. The COVID is there in the urban population more who do not who do not have the balanced diet. If you go to Uttarakhand or Shimoga, you will see 5 varieties of food they take every day, which is a balanced food. Whereas in Bangalore, it is like bread and that kind of a culture. So that's why they are paying the price. Okay.
All right, sir.
Sir, it's Chow Chow Bath in Bangalore.
Indeed, the local flavor.
But I agree with your point. So just to give a quick answer to that gentleman who asked the question, there is the RTI, the Right to Information Act. There is the Employment Guarantee Act. Both these big differentiators in India came through individual citizens, civil society groups, pressurizing and lobbying with the government to bring these changes. So it is possible to bring change, provided we mobilize enough and we are sensitive enough and push our politicians enough to do it. It's possible to do that.
All right, sir. So we'll just take this last question. To both of you, of course. Can this COVID-19 situation be an opportunity to increase people's sensitivity towards this global crisis, such as climate change?
I unfortunately take a pessimistic view. What is happening is we are not learning the right lessons. We're not learning what we need to do. Somehow all the talk is how do we get a V-shaped bounce back of the economy? How do we quickly go back to business as usual? Not learning the destruction of the ecosystem is causing the pandemic in the first place. So it is an opportunity. It was an opportunity. I'm not sure that we're going to seize this opportunity at all.
No, also public memory is too short. See, 1918, we had a similar kind of a problem. But our generation, we didn't even knew about it. Okay, the same thing will happen. We'll get a vaccine, and then people come back to the normal life, and they will start emitting more and more, and we'll have the same situation. And of course, there are some people like us who will counter that. Probably if our number increases, things might change. Then we can put a balance in the system, okay?
Surely, sir. Any last words of wisdom from both of you to the young generation out there, sir?
Well, I would say be sensible and responsible. The country has given many things to us. Let us also protect the motherland. Let us not abuse Mother Nature. Mother Nature provides us the clean air and water. When we respect it, if we abuse it, we'll have an unhealthy population. That is not I would like to see. Okay.
I'm saying that you're a privileged lot. The younger generation is a privileged lot because you have access to knowledge and information at a scale unprecedented in human civilization. You just have to sit in front of your computer. You have fabulous mentors. Choose the right mentors. Choose the right teachers who will get you the right message in the right direction. And the world is yours to change, right, and to transform. It's the best of times ever in the human history. We will never ever be in these good times. Make full opportunity, make full use of it. And there's a society waiting to benefit from the kind of knowledge that young people will bring, right? There is poverty, there is ecological destruction. If you're able to address both these, poverty, inequality, and ecological destruction and restore the ecology and the ecosystems, man, what more would you want to ask for apart from Chow Chow Bath? Yeah? So it's absolutely the best of time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. T.V. Ramachandra and Mr. Vishwanath. I thoroughly enjoyed doing this discussion with both of you. And indeed, the audience speaks for it, of course, in the comment section. So I think in the long term, pandemic will offer certain lessons and opportunities, just like you said, leading to environmental actions. Our response to this health crisis will only shape how we deal with climate crisis in the next decades. Of course, times of change can lead to the introduction of long-lasting sustainable habits, like what Dr. T.V. Ramachandra and Mr. Vishnath say about it. Thanks to the outbreak, some habits are, incidentally beneficial to the environment. Of course, may last, since people may have experienced scarcity in the situation. Like, say, for example, people have traveled less and then personal consumption has reduced. Food wastage, of course, has reduced. So finally, it's all about, how each of us can create a plan for a prosperous future through a focused effort in taking along with us a young generation committed to change, like both of you said. So thank you so much, sir, being part of this panel. I totally enjoyed this session with both of you here, and we look forward for both of your participation in our subsequent webinars that we plan to do from Breakthrough Science Society as well. And thank you everybody for watching this webinar today and the panel discussion. We will see you tomorrow in our last webinar that we are hosting on, the media and scientific temper. So stay tuned. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Good night. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Sure.